Well, good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever you are. This is Fadi, and with me here in our virtual studios, our dear friend and brother Mel, whom we've been doing a number of historical criticism shows related to origins, especially in this case, of course, the origin of Islam. But today, I asked Mel if he's available to do a show on a unique situation that just happened recently. And I'm going to shed some light on it right now. But the reason why I asked him to come in, because he and I did a video series related to some of the original criticism or the historical criticism related to origin of Islam. And one of the topics we addressed or he brought up to the forefront has to do with artwork, images, and statues related to Muhammad. And that's why I remembered immediately that it will be really unique to bring him back and show that Islamic basically sources and even within Islamic boundaries, such work was permissible or at least noticeable, and it's available for others to report on it. What is the situation? Obviously, the situation has to do with the most recent firing of a professor at Hamlin University, a small university in Minnesota. The firing happened simply because the professor goes by the name Erica Lopez Prater. She showed basically an image of Muhammad, And the class apparently is going to address different figures. It's not Muhammad only, and will show whatever artwork that can really relate to that particular figure. And according to the professor was fired, that she has given basically a warning to the students that a painting containing an image of Muhammad was going to be displayed few minutes ahead of time. And she also, in the syllabus itself, she issued warning to students that the class would contain images of holy figures, including the Prophet Muhammad. And I would tend to believe that, because many times you hear about people getting irritated over the fact that Muhammad has been displayed or showed, and people get upset. So this professor, I mean, I would hope that she has done her homework. She's studied all of that. She's familiar with the issues, and she also counted the cost, if that's the case. And despite all of these warnings, obviously, it appears that one senior student came back after the class and complained to the administration about the imagery and the fact that he was really traumatized by it. Okay, well, we don't talk about the student. I don't know who the student is. I don't know why the student was traumatized. We respectfully, we want to at least take a academic look at things. Now, why are the images of Muhammad prohibited? At least the way I was brought up to believe is that this is kind of like almost idealizing someone, making him an idol, worshiping him, and also that Islam prohibits having any imageries, because that's kind of like take you back to the ages of ignorance when people will build from rocks and from wood and other statues to worship, and somehow you are going to look at Muhammad now and begin to worship Muhammad rather than to worship the God who sent him. Wow, that's amazing, because the last I checked, Muhammad is equal to Allah and he is worshipped. But that's a whole different story, of course. We will talk about that at a later time. With me now, of course, here in our virtual studios is our dear friend and brother Mel, who I am going to ask to really take us through a survey or a journey related to this particular issue, so that I let you, as the viewers, judge for yourself. Mel, welcome back, my friend.
It's great to be back. What occurs to me about this situation is the professor has got in trouble for holding a mirror up to Islam, and Islam didn't like the image that shone back at it. So all she did was indicate what Muslims in the past had created, and it was created by Muslims for Muslims, and she got in trouble for it as a non-Muslim, which is the height of hypocrisy. So
yeah. I mean, if you can repeat what you just said, the image that she showed, the artwork, was done by Muslims.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it was a reverent image as well. It wasn't done in mockery. It's very tame as images go. And it would be the image that every Muslim has in their mind, whether they admit it or not. Whenever they think of Muhammad, they would think of an image like this. So it's not as if they don't have an image in their own brain, in their own mind. So I think she did everything that you'd expect as a sensitive academic, conscious of possible reactions. She gave all the Muslims due warning weeks before the event and even before the presentation. So I think the person who joined the course had an agenda going into the class, but that's probably another issue. Okay, so I'm going to start by looking at the history of this situation here. You've already alluded to Dr. Erica Prater, and the image that caused her trouble was from Rashid al-Din's Compendium of Chronicles, which was made in Iran during the early 14th century. I'm going to show the image that she alluded to, but also some other images from that as well. Okay. Now, where I got all this material is it's freely available on the internet. The article that I have up here is from Christiane Gruber. She's the foremost expert on Islamic art, and she was the person who started the petition. She obviously feels very strongly that people who are interested in Islamic art shouldn't be restricted in this way. So a comment here from a blog I read, which I thought was a kind of good summary. It was quite common among wealthy Muslims during the Middle Ages to have illustrated copies of the Quran and Hadith that had within their pages pictures of Muhammad. This was not a rarity. It was especially common during the early 14th century Ilkhanid dynasty in Persia, but continued to be commonplace during Persia's Timurid dynasty of the 14th to 18th centuries, and even the Ottoman Empire had many artistic depictions throughout the 14th to 16th centuries. So this is happening over a vast geographic area and over a large period of time as well. So we can't just say, well, this is a Shia thing, this is a Sunni thing, this is a Sufi thing. It's happening across the sects in different eras. There's support among the wealthy for this. There's also support for ordinary commoners as well. So we can't really just brush it off and say, well, this is just an anomaly. It was an awful lot more widespread, but I think a lot of Muslims have a kind of an amnesia about their past, and they imagine that what it was like in the Middle Ages is like what it is today. But Islam has gone through different eras and has changed how it views things over the centuries, sometimes going back and forth like a seesaw. Now, in the it's a little bit hard to see my slide here, but in the Ilkhanid dynasty, they had images of Muhammad in both the Quran and the Hadiths, and this is the period from 1256 to 1353 AD. It was also commonplace during Persia's Timurid dynasty of the 14th to 18th centuries. For example, Rashid al-Din's Compendium of Histories. This was the manuscript that the professor referred to. Now, the place that this book was created was in Tabriz in northwestern Iran, as you can see on the image. So here are some of the images. So this is Muhammad as a young boy. He's recognized as a prophet by the Christian monk Bahira, and even the camels are bowing down to him, and there's an angel above his head. Muslims in that time would have been quite comfortable with this image. So it's quite strange. I think if the Muslims at that time knew that Muslims in the 21st century were getting upset by this image, they would be scratching their heads and wondering what's the big issue. So they didn't seem to have a problem with it. They didn't see Muhammad maybe in the way that Muslims do today. So the dates are there, 1307 AD. Again, from the same book. This is the image that caused the problem for the professor. Now, I ask you, apart from the fact that Muhammad's face is showing, I don't see what the issue is with this picture. It is not inflammatory. It's just a regular image. I'm sure most Muslims have seen this at some stage in their life. and probably
Absolutely.
didn't.
I agree with you, Mel. And there are other images, for instance, when Muhammad participated in the replacement of the black stone and things of that nature. I mean, it is kind of like, I guess it's fair to say these images, these artworks are trying to relate historical parts of the life of Muhammad.
Absolutely. And they were particularly useful for people who were illiterate at the time, because you learned your stories of the Quran through these images. So someone could point to the image and go, this is what happened. And the person go, oh, yeah, I get it. Because at that time, illiteracy rates were very high. So most people couldn't read the Quran. They might have heard it. But to get to know all the hadiths and so on, these images would have been very useful as a teaching tool. So the image that you just mentioned a second ago, again, this is a very famous image. I dare say 90% of Muslims have seen this at some stage of their life. It's Muhammad solves the dispute over lifting the black stone into position at the Kaaba. What's interesting, of course, as an aside, is the fact that all of the people in here are depicted in an Asiatic fashion, but that's an issue for another day.
And you think, Mel, I mean, I studied this, of course, growing up, and we were always proud of the Prophet of Islam simply because he was this wise person who helped 4 tribes not to have a scuffle over replacing the black stone. And you know, the minute you hear the story, it's natural for you as a human being to begin to imagine, how did that happen? You know, how did he look? What did they do? So images like this kind of like help your imagination kind of you know, become more solidified. You look at something.
Absolutely. What's interesting about this image is, apart from the fact that he's in a central position, he looks no different than the others. He's just an ordinary human being. So you couldn't make the case that this is idolatry in any fashion. They are treating him as just a normal human being, an important figure, and he's in the center, of course. And they're showing esteem for him because he's resolving a dispute. But other than that, he's not shown as above human beings or on the level of Allah or anything like that. So this should not be a problem for Muslims. Now, here's another image, and he's now on the Burak. He's taken part in the Miraj, the night ride. And again, from the same book, this is a bit more mythological. This is probably a source of embarrassment maybe for some Muslims today. This might be an image that they'd rather not be shown. But again, this is an image that many Muslims will have seen during their lifetime. And now here's another one. This is from another source. It's from the Jami al-Tawarikh, dated 1314 to 1305. Muhammad riding the horse, receiving the submission of the Banu Nadir, a Jewish tribe he defeated at Medina. Again, you can see his image is shown. I think you could probably argue he's depicted as something greater than a human being here. So there's definitely a movement towards perhaps divinizing him, or at least suggesting that he's a prophet or something on that level. Here's another image.
Yeah, Muslims in general and truly believe that Muhammad is a special person. So I don't think they're going to really look at that and see the cloud around him or something and be baffled by it. In fact, they probably will think that's even suitable for him, and that's why it should be that way. But the interesting part is that you're seeing these images unfolding and trying really to relate parts of the biography of Muhammad. I mean, his first revelation encounter with Gabriel, or the incident about the black stone, and the list would go on and on and on. So I don't see anything so far, by the way, that is damaging. In fact, some of these images are found at Khalili, basically collection, which we have a lot of Quranic manuscripts part of that Khalili collection. So it's a very reputable collection, to say the least.
Yeah. This is also a very famous image. It depicts Muhammad at the front on a camel and Jesus behind on a donkey. They both have halos, and it references Isaiah's vision. in relation to future prophets and so on. Again, this is a very famous image. So again, we're just emphasizing the fact that these images aren't a one-off. There was a lot of these images. Here is another one. Now, this is from Iran. Shiraz is the location where this was created. The Prophet Muhammad is enthroned, surmounted by angels, and surrounded by his companions. And this appears in the Iranian book Shahnameh by Ferdowsi. And this is the early 14th century. This is one of Persia's most important books. And generations of Muslims in Iran would have read this book because it recounts the story of the kings of Persia. And yet we have images of Muhammad in there. So it seems to me that if this was something that was frowned upon by Muslims, you wouldn't have this image in such a central book as the Shahnameh. Here is another image. Again, this is created in Tabriz, northwestern Iran, in 1320 during the Timurid Empire. Muhammad is here depicted with an angel, and again we can see that there's no problem showing his image. Here is another image, and it is created in Herat, again during the same Timurid Empire reign. Hafiz el-Abru died in 1430, so the 15th century, and this depicts, I believe, the birth of Muhammad, and it reminds me very much of the nativity scene. So they're kind of depicting Muhammad as like another Jesus. I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Actually, I mean, it's just some of these images are very interesting. Like you said, you mentioned Isaiah, you mentioned this related to Christ and other things. But all I want to say is, and I want to really emphasize, I'm bringing you back on the screen here. I want to emphasize what you mentioned earlier. Early Muslims, and we're finding this, by the way, in different areas, not just in this area. Early Muslims, seems to me, based on my findings and readings, and others also have done the same, they were much more open-minded, much more flexible, much more forgiving, and much more really interactive with the community around them. They were not dogmatic about things like this. They were making their case and willing to listen to critique of that. It wasn't until later on you begin to see this pushback that resulted into what we see today.
Yeah, I think the move towards a more extreme idea of Islam was part of a power grab. There were always different groups that wanted to get ascendancy. And so if you could form your own ideology, you could gain control. I think that was a large part of the reason for it. So here's another image. Now we can see Muhammad has got flames around him. They're suggested to be prophetic flames. Again, this is Herat, which is in Afghanistan. Okay, so this is 1436. And we also have this other image, again, created at the same time in Herat. And it's Muhammad on the Burak. Again, you can see very significant flames around him, indicating that he is above ordinary human beings. Okay. Now, this one is really kind of makes it very clear the growing position Muhammad has in the Islamic community. On the left is Muhammad, on the right is Moses, and you can see by the flames how much more important Muhammad is in comparison to Moses here.
Let me just add something interesting. We read about this story, of course, at the Mount Transfiguration, at least in Matthew chapter 17, and we read it in Mark also. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because there, Jesus transformed into this very bright looking, and he was talking to Moses and Elijah. I mean, you wonder where these stories will come from.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they simply have copied the gospel stories. They wanted Muhammad to be at least as good as Jesus, so they have to have similar stories, if not better, to compete with the Christians. Because it's kind of like a marketplace of ideas at that time. They have Jews and Christians in their area, and they want to compete. They want to have someone greater than Jesus. So that's how they're presenting Muhammad as a result.
Yes.
Okay. So here's another image, and you have images of Muhammad there. He's depicted there down in the right corner of the screen, and then you have the Archangel Gabriel standing in front, and yeah, his image is still very much shown. So this is again the 15th century. Now in the 16th century, things will change, as we'll see later. Suddenly they want to hide his image. They want to hide at least the image of his face. But so in terms of the Ottoman Empire, then it also had many artistic depictions of Muhammad throughout the 14th to 16th centuries. Please note that the Ottomans ruled the Hijaz under Selim I from 1512 onwards. So the fact that they were allowing images of Muhammad and they were in charge of Mecca and Medina means that people who were going to Mecca and Medina would have been exposed to images of Muhammad if the Ottomans were allowing it and in fact encouraging it. So here's one example. Muhammad presented to the monk Abdul al-Muttalib and the inhabitants of Mecca. This is an 18th century Ottoman copy of a supposedly 8th century original. Now, if that's true, it means that they were making images of Muhammad even as far back as the 8th century. That's potentially just 100 years after Islam began. So that's very damaging in itself. This is located in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Okay. Here's another. This is found in the British Museum. Muhammad is flying over Mecca at the beginning of his night journey. Square building at the center is a Kaaba. And this is from the manuscript entitled Kamse by Nizami, 1494 to 5. Okay. So we can see it's pretty widespread. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, eventually, around the year 1500, in Ottoman era areas, images began to show Muhammad with his face covered by a veil, or in some cases replaced by golden flames. His face was not obscured in every depiction, though, and while the tradition of depicting him in human form waned, it never died. So there was kind of a split in the road. Some people were depicting him with a veil. Some continued to depict his image, say, normally. Now, that poses problems because in the Bible, it talks about that God's face is hidden behind a veil. You cannot look upon the face of God. So it could be interpreted as meaning that they're understanding Muhammad as in some way divine, like Allah, when they hide his face. He's too holy, he's too precious to allow people to see his face. Okay. Here's another example. Now, it's a bit small there to see, but way up at the top, he's sitting on a burak and his face is hidden and there's massive flames coming out of him, flames of grace or prophetic power, whatever it might be. Okay, that's from 1540. It's depicting his ascension. Here's another one. Again, this is found in the Topkapi Palace Library. It is the Prophet Muhammad receiving revelations at Mount Hira. And you can see very clearly there the white veil over his face. Okay. Now, that's late in the 16th century. So you can see that right through the 16th century, there was a definite turn towards veiling Muhammad. So you have really the time frame before the 16th century when they were comfortable showing images of Muhammad. And now things switched in the 16th century. It started off with veiling Muhammad, and eventually, by the time you got to the 20th century, at least some sects within Islam didn't want any images of Muhammad and got very upset about it, but not all Muslims.
But isn't this the story of the history of Islam so far that we've been uncovering, that everything evolves over time? Everything evolves over time.
Yeah. I think this is probably one of the reasons why a lot of Muslims do not want to look at the early history of Islam, because I think it would rock their faiths, because they would see that Islam in the early days is almost like a different religion.
Yeah,
It's changed so much.
And in refusing to do so, they're agreeing that it's a man-made, basically, religion, because it is human being, like you said, in the 15th century, 16th. Muhammad wasn't living in the 15th century to institute this. In fact, I would argue that any Muslim, if they're honest enough, need to go to the Quran and show me a single verse that says anything about the image of Muhammad. Even in the hadith, there is a lot of weakness in there when it comes to that. But we know the hadith was developed over 200 and plus years later after his death. So it's open for question, technically speaking. But why wouldn't Allah himself institute such prohibition, whether about Muhammad or other prophets?
It makes no sense to treat him in that way. It makes a lot more sense for Muhammad to be humble and being treated the same as anyone else, obviously given reverence as a prophet, but no greater reverence than any of the other prophets. Certainly, we don't have this situation when we see the images of other prophets. So he's been treated in a very unique way. Let's put it that way. Okay, so here is another Ottoman image. Now Muhammad is here. He looks like he's on fire. He's got loads of flames coming out of him, and his face is hidden again behind a veil. Okay.
But it seemed like someone is bowing down in front of him.
Yeah, that's a very odd thing to be doing, particularly considering the prohibition against idolatry.
That's right.
So we have this confused position towards idolatry. They're kind of on one level they believe that they're avoiding idolatry, but on the other level they're actually becoming idolatrous the more they try to fight against it. So here's another image. This was from Bukhara. Okay. So this is the night journey of Muhammad on his steed, and it's from a copy of the Bustan of Sakti, dated 1514. You'll see that his image is shown in this one. It's because this is a different area, so the prohibition on the veil of the prohibition on the showing the face of Muhammad hasn't come to this area yet. Okay. But as you can see, we've looked at areas over here in Tabriz. We've looked at areas down in Shiraz. We've looked at Bukhara. We've looked at Ottoman areas. So wherever we're going, we can find examples of this. And there are populations comfortable with these images. These images survived all those centuries. So there were literally millions of Muslims that could have destroyed these images if they had a problem with it. And yet they survived, which tells you a story by itself. Now we're going to go into the 20th century now, and this is a postcard in Algeria. It's dated the 1920s, and this is an image of Muhammad going into a cave with a cobweb surrounding it. I think this is a fairly familiar story for most people. And as you can see, we're only talking exactly 100 years ago. No problem with images. Can you imagine Muslims today sending a postcard through the postal system with an image of Muhammad? With
Not only that, image of Muhammad with warriors carrying swords and waging jihad. Yeah, that's politically correct.
Yeah. So they were very comfortable with it way off in Algeria up to 100 years ago. Now, I don't know what their position on it now, but it just goes to show it was widespread. People were comfortable with this. What about modern era Iran? Will we find images of Muhammad? Surely not. This is the hardcore believers. They're not going to have images of Muhammad, surely. Here's a poster from the Islamic Republic of Iran from the 1990s. This is of a young Muhammad. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, by the way, they have images like this of Muhammad as a young person, along with Al-Mahdi, along with Jesus. In fact, especially when it comes to end times, they depict him a lot.
Yeah, so I think Iranians in general are very comfortable with this. If you ask an Iranian maybe what is important to them, they're going to say Islam, obviously, but they're also going to say the Persian heritage. And the Persians were very comfortable with a lot of things. They were comfortable with depicting people in art. They were also comfortable with drinking alcohol. And, you know, we mentioned Shiraz a couple of times today in the images. And some of our viewers may be aware there's a wine called Shiraz, and it's actually named after a wine vine that existed in Iran. It's not. It doesn't actually come directly from it. It's just an acknowledgement of a great wine vine. So the Iranians were comfortable with drinking wine. They were comfortable with having images of Muhammad, and still are, well, at least comfortable with images of Muhammad.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, I want to be careful here. I don't want to say that I've studied all Iranian or Persian sources, but in general, you get the sense when you do that, that they have their own version of Islam. In fact, they would strongly disagree with the Sunni version of many things related to Islam.
Yeah. And actually, if you go back a few centuries ago, like I used to think that Shia Islam existed in Iran all that time, but it didn't. There was Sunni Islam was in Iran, and it switched over to Shiism a few centuries ago. So it's gone. Even that there has changed over time. So again, everything evolves when it comes to Islam. Here's another image. Iranians are so comfortable with images of Muhammad, they even have images of Muhammad in a children's book. This is from 2006, and the book was called Greetings, Rose of Muhammad. Now his face is veiled, but still, it's still meant to be an image of Muhammad.
But it's an interesting image, by the way. You watch this a lot for Christians who were doing images like this, representing the cross, and you would see a light, coming from the sky, and it's almost like they are praising God and referencing the cross. So this is very interesting image.
Yeah. There's definitely something there. They're imitating Jesus a lot in their depiction of Muhammad. It's uncanny. I think that there's definitely a book to be written on that whole issue, down through the centuries, in terms of the stories, the images, and so forth. There's a lot of parallels there. Here's another image, and this is from Tehran in 2008, and it's on the side of the building. And I think this is still quite common. You'll find images of Muhammad on buildings, on murals, and so forth. So this hasn't gone away. And this is from a movie. The movie was called Muhammad, the Messenger of God, and you have a young Muhammad who enters a monastery where he is recognized as a prophet by the Christian monk Bahira. Now, what the filmmakers did was they veiled out Muhammad's face. You actually never see his face, but yet you're depicting Muhammad in a movie, essentially. You're not seeing a shadow of him, you're actually seeing him.
I mean, have you seen the movie Ar-Risala, which is the message, basically, that was done by
Quinn, was it?
At least we watched it in the 70s and even the 80s. And in there, you do not see him. You see like his camel, and you see like his, stick, for instance, or staff. You see just the edge, but everybody's talking to him. They're humbled that he's there, but you never see him actually.
Yeah.
And I think Tony Quinn is the one who played basically as one of the main characters in the movie.
Yeah, I don't think his first name is Tony. What is it? Someone in the comments can tell us. It's something Quinn, but I think it's something else. Can't think of his first name. And it is actually. I call him Anthony Quinn. So yes, it is. Tony Quinn,
it is Anthony Quinn. Yeah, and I'm just but he passed away. I think he died. But it was a very famous movie. I mean, I remember in Saudi, every household was buying either the videotapes, or sometimes they have the old rolls, and watching and inviting people to come in and watch, and it became really a sensation. And I think it was translated into different languages as well.
Yeah. So it's interesting in comparison to that movie, they've actually gone a further step towards showing him completely. So they're veiling him. So they're taking a 16th century kind of a position here in this recent movie. Who knows in the future, maybe in another 10 years, they might actually show him completely as an ordinary human being, same as everyone else. Who knows? But I'd say if it were to happen, I'd say Iran is probably the most likely place where it would happen, because they seem to be, of all the Muslim countries, they seem to be the most comfortable with that. So, in conclusion, then today, I think I've argued that Islam has a long tradition of depicting Muhammad in art. Sunnis, Shias, Sufis, it doesn't matter. North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, again, doesn't matter. 10th, 15th, 20th century, again, it doesn't matter. Muslims made images of Muhammad for other Muslims. That's what I would argue. And I would encourage Muslims who are skeptical of what I've presented to go and do the research and go and look for yourself. There are probably hundreds more images out there that come from all the different centuries. You know, so it's I think it speaks for itself. Someone in the comments a few minutes ago said a picture says 1,000 words, and I think that's true in this case.
Absolutely, and you know, I think what we're seeing is that none of these images that you have shown so far denigrate Muhammad or his character, or even in any way try to depict him in an image that is contradictory to how Islam views him. And even that image that got the professor fired has to do with his encounter with the angel Gabriel, which is something that the Quran itself is silent about. It never says there was a cave encounter with an angel Gabriel. It never even declared to you in the Quran that Gabriel is actually an angel, and the list can go on and on. But she went with, probably she did a research, found this, thought that was very respectful. It sees that there is many other images that were done by the same person or others, and yet at the same time she lost her job. I suspect that she will be paid basically some restitution over this. I don't know if she'll be back again, but it shows really how manipulative, you know, people can be. They did not heed to the warning and waited until after the class, and then launched basically a claim or a complaint, knowing that it's going to be in the news because everybody listened to them, you know, and everybody's concerned for them these days.
Yeah, I was going to say that the problem with all of this is that you have a tiny minority of Muslims who are claiming to represent all Muslims, as if all Muslims have the same opinion. And the image I have in my mind is of a big elephant, and the trunk is saying, I am Islam. The ear is saying, no, no, I am Islam. The foot is saying, no, 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 I am Islam. The tail is wagging, saying, no, no, I'm the real Islam. And this is what you're seeing. And I think the Muslims centuries ago were an awful lot more mature about this. They recognized that there was legitimate disputes about certain questions, and they allowed each other the freedom to disagree. Whereas today, there's a few who've ascended to powerful positions, and they want to silence, censor anyone who contradicts them. But I think it would be better for everyone if they allowed an awful lot more tolerance, so that people could argue the case why images of Muhammad should either be drawn or not drawn, rather than killing people because someone has done a cartoon, you know?
Yep, that is very true. And it's just an unfortunate thing, because even those Muslims today, let's say many of them are open-minded, especially the young generation, they fear retaliation, to be honest with you. They fear intimidation or persecution or pushbacks, and they can get nasty really when it comes to that. So oftentimes they stay quiet simply because they just want to avoid any problem. So that's why, like you stated, the use of bullying and in sometimes violence, you know, like there was, I think it was in England when a teacher, or I'm sorry, in France, when a teacher was beheaded, decapitated by a student, simply because he, you know, dared to bring things about Muhammad that this student did not like. And these are the kind of stories I should say, that intimidate people. And also we know that Charlie Hebdo or Hebdo story, and how they were killed, you know, and they, I mean, the event, the search for the killers took a couple of days, and everybody was hunting him down, and it was an allegiance to ISIS and all that kind of stuff. So it is unfortunate, of course, that violence can intimidate people. Yet you would have a lot of Muslims say, oh, that doesn't represent Islam or religion of peace. Okay, well, how come no one speaks out against it, you know?
Yeah, it's ironic that everyone in Islam claims that they represent the real Islam, while the others don't. Now, they all can't be right, you know, so I think a bit of humility wouldn't go astray for them, you know, to actually at least acknowledge that these other people are just as legitimately Muslims as they are themselves. Maybe they don't meet eye to eye on every issue, but I think there needs to be more tolerance for each other, so that, you know, there can be legitimate disagreement about certain issues. Same with Christianity. You know, we don't all agree in Christianity on every issue, and I think most Christians are willing to kind of agree to disagree on certain issues and then work together on other issues. And I think that could be the way forward for Islam, at least if Islam continues to exist. Mind you, I think the historical critique is going to ultimately unravel Islam, because it cannot withstand the questioning coming from history, you know.
That is true, and I think it's going to evolve into what you just mentioned, that there is going to be more acceptance of the fact, hey, we have our history, there are different opinions about things. Okay, good for you that you think this way. I'm not going to think that way. And I think it's going to evolve into something like this. But right now, it's going through some growing pains, I think, and it's coming to grips with reality that everything they've been taught, traditionally speaking, the standard Islamic narrative, have a lot of holes in it, and obviously, there is, no mistake when the holes in the narrative were first mentioned, of course. People were laughing, of course, about that, but it is real that there are holes in the narrative and that people need to accept this fact. And there are sometimes contradictions between different stories about the same event, so that tells you that there has been some hearsay or some evolution in the story, or maybe it was reported at a much later time, and so on and so forth. And that's why, Fadi basically brought up this issue, and look at the flack that he faced, just by daring to say there are holes in the narrative. He was referring to exactly this because he's a scholar. He studied these things, and he wanted to be at least transparent about it. And honestly, I really respected him for saying that, because I haven't heard a single scholar to date willing to and dare to state something like that publicly.
Yeah. The other thing I think is pretty obvious here is that there's two levels of ignorance going on. First of all, you have the ignorance of some Muslims who don't know their history, who don't know these images existed and want everyone to be censored. But then you also have the ignorance of people who are in charge of universities, who don't know the full history of Islam, who have a Walt Disney version of Islam, and their version of Islam is of I don't know, like a deer that is so sensitive that if you blew air on it, it will die instantly and needs to be protected with cotton wool at all times. And if anyone challenges it in any way, they're the bad guys. So I think we need to educate two groups of people. We need to educate the people who are in charge of decision making in universities. Also, we need to educate our politicians who run the government, because there's an awful lot of ignorance, particularly among liberal politicians, unfortunately, and they kind of feel that if you say anything reasonable or critical of Islam, you're automatically Islamophobic, which is very unfair. So we have a lot of work to do to try and educate people on all of these issues, and I think maybe what we're doing today might be a good start. Towards that.
Amen. Before we conclude this, obviously, if anyone has any specific question about this particular topic, you can either mention it, or even you can highlight it through Super Chat. Hopefully, some of our amazing moderators can highlight it for us as well. So we'll wait for another 5, maybe 10 minutes if there is interactions. But anything else you're working on right now, Mel? I want to direct people to go and watch that series that we did. In there, actually, you talked, if I recall correctly, about a statue related to Muhammad. Was that true, or am I really off here when we were mentioning something related to Muhammad at some point?
We did refer to a statue of Muhammad. I think it was 6 months ago. There was a report from the Crusaders when they went to Jerusalem of a golden statue of Muhammad. Now, at the time, there was a lot of pushback. Muslims said, no, this couldn't possibly be true. And I left it be to see what else is out there. So, because it's an isolated report, it's very hard to know, is it true? Apart from the fact that the witness was a priest, so it's a kind of, for me, seemed like a credible person to hear the report from. But just something I wanted to say. Someone asked in the comments a second ago, where are these images coming from? if you go back to the beginning of the slideshow, I had 3 links, and that's where I've got all the images. Some of them came from Gruber, Professor Gruber, but all the others came from other websites as well. But in terms of work that I'm researching at the minute, I'm looking at the history of Islam and alcohol at the moment, and that's bringing up quite a few surprises. So hopefully we can discuss that maybe sometime in the future.
With your permission, can I post these links?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to post the links so people can see them later in a chat box. These are the links that Mel is referring to, where you can find some of these images. And by the way, you can do just a simple Google search about images of Muhammad, and many of these images that Mel brought up will be there, giving you reference where they came from, who drew them, when, and all that kind of stuff. So it's out in the open. It's not like it's something hidden or it's something that is taboo. No, it's right there. And they were at least, and he's talking about a scholar that is specialized in the field. So this is why it's disturbing to me to see that some people can lose their livelihood for simply just showing something that is public, is out there, available. She didn't really draw the picture herself and say, oh, I think this is how Muhammad looked like. No, I mean, of course, that would have been kind of like, okay, I can justify why people get outraged. Maybe she really did not present him in a good way, or whatever the case might be, Yeah.
I think it's too easy to manipulate the public into getting uptight about something, or, you can easily generate a protest about something and build it up out of nothing. And this is a great way of distracting the masses, particularly in the Middle East, So if faith is flagging, you just create a furore about an image of Muhammad, and then suddenly everyone is back at 100% fervor for Muhammad again.
But this backfires also because it allows people like us and others to begin to talk about it. Like, I mean, if you do a search about the image of Muhammad and many of the stories written, the New York Post wrote about it, CNN reported it, Britannica, did mention things related to that. Many blogs are written, So what I'm saying, it's actually it will amplify the story, and now it causes people to even search more. And in doing so, they come across shows like ours. They begin to see that there is a level of either ignorance or hypocrisy going on here.
Yeah, the other thing I would say, while I remember, if people haven't signed that petition, please go to it and sign it, because we'd like to get it to a really high number. I think last time I looked, it was about 15,500 signatures, but I think we can do a lot better than that.
Yeah, can you mention the petition one more time, the Spanish, so people know what we're referring to here?
So the petition is for Professor Prater, Erika Prater. Yeah. She was the one who was kicked out of the university for using a medieval image of Muhammad. And so Professor Gruber basically put up the petition asking for the professor to be reinstated, that it was an unreasonable sacking from the job, considering it was a safe image. She gave due warning, and it was politically motivated, I think,
I'm sure. And maybe some of our viewers can share a link to this live stream with Hamline University, so they can get a level of education here about things like this. You would expect that administrators at least would do their homework and investigation first, and then come back and look at the image and say, well, I don't see anything here troubling about this image. Okay, you can resolve it differently rather than to cause people to lose their livelihood over what? Nothing, really. I mean, there was nothing disrespectful in that image whatsoever.
Yeah, I think political correctness is often used as a shorthand for prudence, but you can't do a shorthand for prudence. You have to use good judgment, and therefore you have to do your homework. You have to research things and know what you're talking about when you make a knee-jerk reaction to a professor like that. So hopefully we'll get her back in her position, and so certainly everyone will be listening to what she has to say in her next lecture.
Wonderful. Mel, thank you so much as always. Thank you for everyone being here. Myself and Mel will be doing more series. In fact, there is another series that will be released soon on our channel. So everybody, please go and subscribe to our channel, Sira International. We also ask that you prayerfully consider to support his channel, my channel. In my case, there is Patreon. We're always looking for patrons. We seem like to be bleeding out patrons. We're looking for at least 100 to 200 patrons this year. And PayPal. I don't know about you if you use Patreon or not. So I want to encourage people to go to your channel. What is your channel again? Because you did change the name of that channel to reflect the work you're doing. So please,
it's simply called Islamic Origins, and I have a PayPal account as well. But I don't know if my PayPal is mentioned anywhere. So I'll probably put up a link on my site in the future if anyone wants to do that.
Yeah, you're going to find people that like PayPal and people that don't mind using Patreon, and then you're like...
Or actually, Patreon is mine. Sorry. It's Patreon. Sorry. My mistake.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So again, I was speaking to Mel earlier before the show that we will do another 1 or 2 series this year. And one of it most likely is going to be his findings concerning alcohol and related to basically the Islamic history with alcohol. So stay tuned for that, and hopefully we will be doing that in the next maybe month or 2, and then we'll release it early on this year. Thank you as always, my friend. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to our moderators. Mariana, thank you so much for taking time to join us. It's one of those amazing moderators that we have here. She is faithful. She's always there. Shine, or rain. She's always here, obviously. So I'm hoping that, when you start doing live streams, I don't know if you do live streams or not, that
sometimes
you'll be able to recruit some of those amazing moderators.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. So thanks very much for bringing me on, Al-Fadi.
Absolutely. What a privilege to have you, my friend. Thank you. And I'm hoping that, speaking of that, maybe I'll bring Jay, maybe we'll bring another person if possible, but we need to do a panel discussion and revisit some of these holes that were being uncovered in terms of the historical criticism of Islam.
Absolutely. I'll be up for that.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. This is Al-Fadi over and out. God bless. Take care.